If you look carefully at these images, you'll notice that there's one or two of a different size. If you look at these two, for example, I suppose there's the biggest difference between the two. This one would need to be made marginally bigger in height. I don't think it's going to give us a major problem, to be honest, because of the nature of the images. So what I'm going to suggest we do is to select all of these thumbnails. I'm going to use the shift click method because we need to begin by having all 9 of those images in a layered stack. Now we can avoid having to do that manually by selecting the thumbnails, going to Tools, Photoshop, and load the files into Photoshop layers. Once we've got all the images into a layered stack, I've opened up my layers on the right and we can see them. This is the image which looks to be the one that I've got to adjust the most. If I turn off all of the other images just for a moment, we'll get a good feel for how much we're going to have to adjust the size. But as I said earlier on, I don't think it's going to be a great problem to us. So we're going to have 9 images in our artwork, 3 by 3. What we need to do next is to create the artwork space, and I suppose we've got 2 options here. We could have a piece of wall where we had a set size we wanted to fill. In that case, we could create that size background. I'm just going to use the size of my images here. So the first thing I'm going to do is to just select any one of them, and I've got one on screen. I'm going to go to my image size, and take a note that the width is about 3.5 by 2.7. This one is a small one. Let's try the one at the top. This one is again 3.5. I think most of them are going to be much the same. So you can see there's not a massive difference between them. Now the only reason I need to know these values is because I need to make a calculation on the size of the artwork that I require. So if I've got 3,500 pixels on the width and I'm going to have 3 images, then if we multiply that by 3 we come to 10,500 pixels, and if we deal with the 2.7 height we come to 8,100 pixels. And if you're impressed with my mental arithmetic, don't be, because I've got a pencil and paper beside me and a calculator. But in actual fact I want more pixels than that because I want gaps around my image. But how much of a gap I'm not entirely sure at this stage. But I've got the ballpark figure. I think I need a canvas. Let's add a few thousand pixels onto what I've just multiplied up there. So let me go to Image, Canvas Size. So on the width I worked it out as 3 times 3500, so that's 10.5, but I want more than that, so I'm going to go to something like about 14. I can always crop back, so I suppose it's not a problem then going way over the top. And in the height we want 8.1, well let's say 11. And of course it doesn't actually matter too much if I've underestimated here and we have too little. We can always add some. Let's click OK, and if I hit Control 0 you'll get a feel for the size and shape of the artwork we currently have. Now one of the things that's going to make what we do next quite easy to do is Smart Guides. Smart Guides are in Photoshop Creative Cloud. They're turned on by default. You'll notice I've got my Move tool selected here. So I'm going to start from the top. I don't think there's much to choose between any of these. So I'm going to click and I'm going to move. And as I do, you start to see pink lines appear. And you'll see that I can get this and move it, and I'll see, I get the other ones out of the way I think, you'll see the upright line. So that tells me I'm right in the center of my artwork. So what I'm going to do next is to position everything around this one. But of course I've got different sizes, so I'm going to deal with that first. So I'm going to leave my, well, let's drag this one down to the bottom, and I'm going to work bottom up. No real reason for doing this, but I'm going to select the next one up. And what I'm going to do here is make sure this image is exactly the same size as this one. To do that, I'm going to use my free transform tool, and to bring that on screen, because I'm going to need to do it at least 8 more times, I'm going to hit Control T, but you will find it in the edit menu. Then when I bring the image up to this point, in fact I think we'll zoom in a bit so you can see this a little bit easier. What you'll notice is that the edges will snap to the edges of the image beneath. So as long as I just make sure I've got them in position, when I hit the enter key, I've got 2 identical sized images. Let me take one more. We'll hit Control T to put the bounding box around the edge. We'll bring this one up. You can see there's a little bit of a discrepancy, so snaps into position, snaps into position. Easy to do, just got to do it for each image in turn. Now the spinning round of the screen indicates I've done all of them apart from the last one, and the last one, I think, if I've got my selection right, this is the one that's slightly different in height to the other, so you can see there's a difference there. One other thing too, if when you try to align the images they don't snap into position as mine are. Let me do this last one so you can see it once more. As I drag, it'll snap to the edge, snap to the edge, and you can see I'm distorting this image a little bit, but it's insignificant given the content of the image. Hit the enter key. If the snapping of the free transform tool doesn't happen, it's going to be because in the view menu you've got the snap turned off. I would suggest that 99 times out of 100 this is a great benefit. There are times when we need to remove the snap, so it can be left off. So if you don't snap into position, just put the tick back in place and you'll be back in business. Now I'm going to hit Control 0 to fit my artwork back on screen, because I've got all of my images the correct size. I just need to place them. Let me turn them all off apart from the original one, which I know with those smart guides, if we get the upright, let me select it so I can move it. There's the upright. I know I'm dead center now. So now I can select the next one. Now look what happens when I move it to the right. I can just keep it in that position dead easy. I'm not sure how much of a gap I want. I'm just going to guess at the moment. Let's say something like 3 of those little squares, but I know I'm perfectly level at the top. When I go to the next one, look at that. I've got 678 pixels between the center and the right, and the smart guides has allowed me to just drop this one in exactly the same position. How easy is that? So all we've got to do now is the other 6, and how much of a gap you want to live with in your artwork is going to be a personal choice. Now as you can see by the spinning round of the screen, I have completed a few of those, but I'm about to do number 6. So I've selected it over on the right hand side. I've got the move tool selected still from the top of the toolbox. So when I click the next one and drag it down, you can see how these smart guides first allow me to snap it in the horizontal position, and then it all lines up with the rest of the artwork. Did I slip a little bit there? If I do, or I think I do, I just go back and reassure myself. Now once I've got my basic layout done, I'm looking at the content of the images, because the images down the left I really want the cars facing in, which I've got. The ones in the center are not so important, but I would like to have these all facing in, but this one isn't, it's facing out. Not a big issue, but maybe we could just flip this image over. Now it is taken in perhaps a recognizable place. There's some lighthouse there which someone in France or wherever this was taken may be able to recognize. So it's a personal choice whether you want to flip this particular image over. But if you do, then you need to select it. Sometimes when you're working with a large group of images, let's just select one down at the bottom here. To pick up something like this quickly and easily, with the Move tool selected in the toolbox, if you hold the Control key and click the image, you'll see that it automatically is selected. If I do that with all of these, and you keep an eye on the toolbox on the right, or the layers on the right I should say, you can see how easy it is to select any particular image that we want. So if I wanted to flip this one over, I can do so with Edit, Transform, Flip Horizontal. I could zoom in and take one last look. I did have a look and make sure there was no lettering that I was going to make look odd, and I think we'll get away with that. So we've got all of the images in the correct place. Before we go much further, I think we need to give just a thought to the overall size of the artwork. Maybe look at it in inches or centimeters, whatever you're comfortable with. So image size. So moving away from my pixel values, you can see we do have an enormous image here, which gives us a great deal of scope with what we wanted to do. If we wanted to make a canvas wrap, then we've got to make allowance for the overlap at the edge, but we've got bags of space to do that. But before we proceed, I think we've got to just make sure we've got these all in the position we want them. If we wanted to close the gaps up here, now's the chance to do that. If you wanted a longer, slimmer canvas, then perhaps if you chose 6 images rather than 9, then of course you're going to get a little bit more of a panoramic style of artwork. I think we'll stay with what we have here. What I'm going to do as well is I'm going to amalgamate all of these together. I'm going to use a little tip. I've got all of them turned on. I'm going to hold my Alt key, go to the top of the layers, and I'm going to select Merge Visible. Now what Photoshop has done has taken every one of those and merged them into just one layer. Now at this stage we've done quite a bit of work here, so now we should be saving this to make sure we don't lose any of our work. Now one other thing we could do, I could tidy up my layers just a little bit, because there's a good chance we may not need any of these layers, but I'd like to keep them there just in case. So if I select the top layer and go down here, I'm going to create a group. I could rename the group if I want, but I've only got one group, so I don't think that's really necessary. But what I'm going to do is select all of those with the shift click method, and I'm going to drag them into the group, because then I can close the group and even turn them off. We're just tidying up the layers so we can see more clearly what we're going to do with our artwork. What I want is a base, so let's create that next. If I select my artwork and create a new blank layer, drag it beneath the images. You'll remember as well that we've still got all of these as black and whites. We haven't made them into a sepia tone yet. So at some stage we're going to have to decide if we're going to do that. But to be honest, I quite like the look of them just as they are, but a sepia tone is very easy to create. On the base, what colour do we want? Well, that's going to be personal too, isn't it? But I'm going to clone a colour or a tone from within the images, because I feel that that usually generates a reasonable harmony with the image, and it's not locked in stone anyway. So I'm going to pick up my eyedropper tool, look around for a tone that I think is going to be okay. Something like one of those sky tones there, and you can see it. Let's have a look at how that's going to look by flooding that colour into here. Alt backspace will do that. So there's the basis of our artwork. Is that too light or is that too dark? To be honest, I think I'd like it a little warmer. So I'm going to double click, or single click the color panel there, because I'm going to go up to the yellows here, and I'm just going to darken it a bit and come in a little bit just to give it a tiny little bit of warmth. And I'm going to try that, Alt backspace. That's better. Just something to make the black and white parts of the image pop a little bit. Now, computer generated colour, like we've just created for our background, often looks a little unnatural, especially if we print it. And you can see it's far too smooth compared to the photographic subjects around it. So what I'm going to suggest is we give this a little bit of texture. There's 1,001 things we can do here. I'm just going to give the basics, I think, because you can experiment till the cows come home, basically. But I'm going to go to Filter, Noise, Add Noise. I'm going to add a fair degree of noise in here. Let's have a look at 10. Yep, 10 doesn't look too bad. I'm going to give it 10 pixels of noise. And I'm also going to look at applying a texture too. Now I've got some extra textures apart from those that come with Photoshop. I'm going to apply one of those, I think. You can always find these on the internet. Just do a search for Photoshop textures and you'll find quite a few. I'm going to go to Filter, Texture, Texturizer. Now you can see that the old favourite of the canvas looks particularly nice now. With that noise, it almost gets a sort of fabric look to it, and that wouldn't be a bad choice, I'm going to suggest. But I'm going to go to this little icon here, and I'm going to load a texture, and in my photography folder I've got textures, and the ones I tend to like quite a lot is the cloth. Actually, it's not unlike what we're looking at here. So let's try linen. There you can see the linen. We can give it a little bit more relief if we want to, or we can just float around and try one or two of the others. Let's have a look at what else we've got. Leather is another good choice. So we could say, let's have a look at fine grained leather. We'll open that up. That looks quite nice too. We could perhaps drop the scaling down, drop the relief a little bit to make it delicate. Well, you can see what I mean. We could be checking out different textures for hours. We have to select one at some stage and apply it. Remember though that these backgrounds are pretty easy to create. Now you can hardly see it here, but I hope you can just about see it. But of course, when this is printed, you're going to see that nice and delicate. Let's hit Ctrl-0 to fit that back on screen, and already we can see an improvement with that texture. Now let's create a matte effect. Let's create the effect that we're dropping our frame over the top of all 9 images. Now that's quite easy to create. We've already got the background with our texture. Let's make a copy of that with Ctrl-J. We then need to make a selection of all 9 of those images. But that's easy too, because we've got a layer here. And if we hold the Control key and just click the layer, there's the 9 selections that we need. So let's go back to this particular layer, and what I'm going to do here is to drag that just above those images, and we're going to cut out the holes that you can see there. Control X will do that. Thinking about doing it, there we have it. At the moment it doesn't look any different, but you can see the difference over in the layers. Now I need to make a copy of this. Same as before, Ctrl-J. Select the one beneath, because what we need to do here is to create a shadow using these shapes. If I just turn the one at the top off first, you can see what we're going to do. We need to flood this with black. If I turn off all of the others, you can see the shape we're looking at here. But of course, if I select black and I just flood this with my shortcut keys of Alt backspace, it's going to flood into the holes as well. So we need to lock or preserve the transparent nature of these holes before we hit Alt backspace with black selected as our foreground colour. That's going to provide us with the drop shadow effect, or the matte effect we're looking for. Before we proceed, we need to remove the lock now, because we need to blur the black layer, and this lock would prevent that. So let's just click the lock from here, or turn it off from the top left of the layers. I can turn on my coloured matte at the top and also the images, and I think if we look at one of these images we will be able to evaluate what we're going to apply. So with the zoom tool selected, let me zoom in to that top right one, which is quite a nice image, and with the black layer selected we can go to filter, blur, Gaussian blur. Now it's come up with a 30 pixel radius, and you can see it looks pretty good. Let's take that to 10. 10 is pretty delicate, maybe a little too delicate. 50? 50 starts to get a little too much. So I think that 30 wasn't a bad place to be honest. And that was a pure fluke. Must have been the setting last used by the Gaussian blur, and I don't know when that was, but it's working here. So I'm going to click OK to accept that. Taking just a few seconds to apply it, I'll hit Ctrl 0, but it is difficult at this size to see the effect, but I think we can still see it. And here's another suggestion, and I'll go back into this so we can see clearly. Now it may be nice if we can put a thin line around the outer edge of all 9 of these squares, because I think it's just going to pick out and make the images pop just a bit more. Now we can do that fairly easily and with a degree of insurance too, because we can work on a new layer. I'm going to select the top layer and hold the Control key and click the thumbnail, and I get a selection of all 9 of my holes in that top border there. So I'm going to add a few pixels of black to this line, but I don't want to work on there in case I change my mind. I want to make a new blank layer. This one is just going to have the lines on it. So let's go to, I'll tell you what we'll do first of all. I'm going to hide my selection. Although the selection is still there and working, it may help us to see the line better. So Control H will hide the selection, edit, stroke. How many pixels do I want? Well, this artwork is fairly big, so I'm going to say 5. I'm going to say on the inside of the edge here, so let's click OK, and immediately we see that line pop into place, and it just gives it, I'll turn that layer off so you can see a quick before and after, and I think those 5 pixels are probably just about right. If I zoom into the corner here, not only will you see our texture, you'll also see our drop shadow and you'll see our line. Now of course you get the opportunity to adjust the line in any thickness you wish, and of course what I didn't say in relation to the shadow here, if I select the shadow, I can actually lessen the impact of the shadow using the opacity, so you've got infinite control of the presentation of your 9 images. And I've just hit Ctrl 0 to fit the image back on screen. Now we've got one layer in our layered stack here which we're not actually using, but it does give us the option to use it if we wish. Let's go to the top left just as an example, because if we didn't want to use the matte effect, I could turn that off, I could turn that off, and now we've just got our images laid nicely on our background, which is at the bottom, but we still have that thin black line just holding the images in and making them look nice in the presentation. But of course when we look at large artwork on screen as small as this, we lose the the scale. That's why I zoom into these things, because you now get to see them a little bit more naturally. But I quite like my matte effect, and I'd be happy with that, so I could quite happily drop that bottom layer in the bin. I've just cropped a little bit from the left and right just to tidy up my artwork, but once you get to this position and you've saved your work, remembering we've still got a group of original pictures sitting at the bottom there, but once you've got to this position, you could start to lower the impact on your computer if you wish. I would drop this in the bin now because I've got it saved elsewhere. I've decided I'm not going to use that base one, so I'm going to drop that in the bin. But I would keep the rest in layers because I'd like to experiment and see if I can choose a different tone for this matte frame on the top and see if I can get it looking better with the images. And here's just one option. Bring up your levels. You'll find them in the image menu, image, adjustment, levels, and all I'm thinking of doing here is just adjusting the background. Remember, the tone that we put in it and the texture will remain. Making it lighter may lessen the impact a little bit, but you can see it looks quite different when we lighten the border. We're not going to pure white. I think that may be a little bit over the top, but that's a personal choice too. But of course we've also got the opportunity of going the other way and maybe darkening down just those tones. We did put a little bit of warm colour in there. We could take that out and reduce it to monochrome. Image, adjustments, hue and saturation. Take the saturation out completely, and we've got another method to adjust the tone of the drop mount. Well, you can see the sort of options you have. And of course we could get a feel for that sepia tone that I mentioned earlier. Maybe if I zoom in so we can see not all of the artwork but more of it, and I select my image, I'm going to bring up my hue and saturation. Control U will do that. Let's tuck it over here out the way. I'm going to tick the colorize box. I'm going to go to my hue and put a value of about 24 or 25. And in the saturation, well, these are far too warm in my opinion. I usually select anything from about 10 to 15, 8 to 15, depending on what I feel works. So there's 8. 15 I think is too warm. In fact, on this occasion I think we could even go back down to 6. Let's untick the preview. You can see that the sepia tone now is very, very delicate. Maybe I was right the first time with 8. So there is another option that we have at our disposal. With the spinning round of the screen, you can see here that I'm moving away from the traditional sepia tone because we don't have to be locked into that just because they're historic pictures. Here I've used the hue and saturation and that colorize box to give a very delicate blue tone to the images, but of course then I needed to do something very similar to the frame, so we had a harmony with the presentation. Now I know very little about the location and the vehicles that we can see in our finished artwork, but of course if we did some research online, if we was enthusiastic enough, we could maybe identify all of those cars and put a very delicate name just below each one. But do make it delicate, otherwise words can easily overpower.